Rick Naerebout, how are you?
We're doing well. We're doing well.
We're doing well. I love the royal we. I can't get away from it either. Like, we're doing swimmingly. Thank you very much. You are the executive director for the Dairymen Association. Is that accurate?
That is accurate and correct.
Good. The one thing I have to get right today.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Dairy is, as far as ag goes, dairy. I have an interview coming up with the sugar beet queen of Idaho.
Sugar Sam.
Yeah, Sugar Sam. She's coming in. Super excited about it, but I cannot say that like sugar beets are like this big contentious or like problematic, or not problematic, but an industry that is being hyper focused on. But dairy is one that is getting wrecked, predominantly because the labor force required to deliver dairy products to Idaho and the United States, the labor force required does not exist in the United States through United States citizens, nor does it exist sufficiently, in sufficient numbers, in authorized work populations. That puts dairy in a horrendous situation where they have to figure out how to supply with market forces. So you can't pay people like $50 an hour, how to supply under normal market forces a product in the absence of a sufficient supply of employment. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have that correct as well.
When did this battle start? Take me back. Help me understand.
Yeah. So really probably the point we take you back to is Ronald Reagan's presidency in 1986. That is the last time we have seen a president or Congress do anything to address our need for foreign-born labor in this country. And you had Reagan legalize individuals that were in country without status in 1986.
And
so,
legalize them in what way? Just say like you're legally allowed to work here. You're not legalized like nationalized, like you're a citizen, right?
Didn't give them citizenship, essentially gave them a green card. So gave them permanent residency, then they could get in line to become a citizen.
If they so elected.
If they so desired, yes. So he provided those individuals in 1986 that legal status they needed to stay in country and seek whatever employment they wanted and have legal documentation to do that in the full light of day and not have to, operate in the shadows.
So that only applied to people that were currently there, though, in 86. So what if you were the dude who showed up the next day?
Yeah.
It's like, can we backdate this? Can I say I like ran over the border yesterday? But that essentially that's what the marker was, right? There was a date. They were like, everyone here on this day or before, and obviously stipulations, gainfully employed, no criminal record, things of that nature. That they had an opportunity to continue living and working and supplying the United States with a workforce, getting returned, paying taxes, this whole thing. But after that point, this was not like a rolling, everyday immigration reform. So somebody shows up in 1990, they're like, well, you should have been here 4 years ago in 86 when that was the date. So that was the last time we had some movement towards, okay, let's figure out a legal means for these people that exist here currently, but are unauthorized to be here in an authorized manner.
Yeah. And that's the last time you saw the visa programs that exist today. Really, in that time frame was when a lot of those visas were established and modified to what we recognize them as today.
So 86, we zero out the functional working unauthorized laborer. We zero them out to just like, fine, you're here. And now we've built up for 39 years and essentially collected more people as people come here unauthorized, and those people have not had a path once here, illegally. They have not had a path like we saw in 86 to become a just, authorized worker.
Yeah. And you hear a lot of conjecture of, well, just go back and do it legally. The line to go back and do it legally is over 20 years long right now.
Okay, help me understand this, because some people have talked about this, and every time somebody says do it the legal way, anybody in the know, and that's not me, responds, that's pretty much impossible. Help me on what if I was out of the country, right, and just, hey, I want to go to the United States and work for the dairy industry. What does that look like for me?
So to go through the application process to get yourself whether you're seeking green card status, there's not a visa for dairy. So essentially you would have to be looking for green card status, which is permanent residency.
Why is there not like an H-2B or whatever it is?
For whatever reason, when they established the H-2A is the agricultural visa. When they established that H-2A visa, it is strictly for temporary and seasonal employees and jobs.
So like corn, but dairy doesn't, like you got to milk that cow every day.
Yep.
So this is okay. So this style of ag workforce is unique because it's not wrapped around a growing season. Dumb here, just catching up. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's essentially the issue.
Yeah, that is really the crux of when you look at year-round agriculture and dairy for Idaho. You know, we're clearly the largest impacted sector of ag in Idaho on this issue. But any year-round agricultural job does not have a visa that they can use to procure foreign-born labor. And so we're out in the wind in trying to be able to have a process like other sectors of the economy have to go out there and procure a foreign-born worker.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so if I'm a guy who's living in, like, say, Peru, okay, and I'm like, okay, I hear the dairy industry is strong in Idaho. I want to go up to Idaho, and I go to some department to say, hey, I'd like to apply to go work dairy in Idaho. They say, okay, great. You're Peruvian? Okay, awesome. You have to apply for a green card. And you're like, no, I just want to be a laborer. They're like, that doesn't exist. You have to apply for a green card. And the green card line, you're saying, is like 20 years back.
Yeah. If you're just walking into it cold saying, okay, I want to figure out how to get permanent residency in the United States, get legal status to go there and work in any sector of the economy, which a green card is what you need to do that. To do that without any connections and to just get in line and do it the legal way, as a lot of people like to say, that line is over 20 years long.
Okay. So because of that, since 1986, the dairy industry has had to rely more and more and more on unauthorized workers. Now, there's always the argument that they're like, well, why don't you get, native born workers?
Yeah.
What, like, I know kind of at a high level, but like, what are the nuances? What are the nuanced problems with that?
So, one, the domestic workforce hasn't wanted to work in agriculture in decades. Similar to construction, you go out to certain sectors of our economy, the jobs that are more manual in nature, that are dirty, that you're exposed to the elements, that have all these attributes that are less desirable,
Sure,
have gone to immigrant labor forces because they're the ones that are willing to do that work. And part of this is just a math problem. We have a shrinking birth rate. We have a shrinking domestic workforce in the United States as we see boomers retire and the incoming generations aren't as large. We don't have enough domestic workers to support our economy. And so it really becomes this math equation of, okay, the domestic workers are going to seek out the jobs that are most desirable, that have the better working conditions, where in the summertime they can be in air conditioning and wintertime they can be in a heated office. And the jobs that don't have those attributes are less desired, regardless of pay. You look at the pay structure in agriculture in Idaho, and you're looking at a starting wage between $18 and $20 an hour. Starting wage.
That's like In-N-Out prices, man. That's crazy.
So you put that number in front of politicians and it will pay more. Well, my question back at them is, okay, are you in support of raising the minimum wage then? If you say the wages that we're paying at $18 to $20 are unrealistic, then surely you're a proponent of raising the minimum wage, are you not? And so it becomes this very frustrating argument because they want to say, well, just pay more or mechanize more and that would solve your problem. And that's just not real.
Well, mechanization and automation only go so far, especially when you're dealing with, milking systems. You're dealing with large animals and small animals. It's like, right. And I'm not an expert. I just know that we have limiting, like, I can't get a robot to like, put socks on my feet. And like there's a certain amount of dexterity. I actually have a dear friend who had whose husband husband's family did have like a 40,000 head dairy in Idaho. And he was explaining to me, on Christmas morning, they'd give the workers like half days, and all the kids would go out to like, deal with things on Christmas mornings and get, like talking about all the nipples that have to pop off. He's like, you throw those in a bin, you get the things, blah, blah, and you're like he had this real kind of ASMR explanation, but he was like, your hands move like you're flying through these like nipples that are like hard to get on. Then you got to get the other ones on, and just like filling up these bottles. And he's like, 40,000 multiple times a day. It's like gallons and gallons and gallons of milk going on. It's a whole big thing, right? And automation. Musk is notorious for attempting to automate his Tesla factory. And I was talking to a friend of mine former friend of mine who used to work there, and he's like, they tried to automate unwrapping of pallets, right? So just imagine like big pallets with equipment or stuff comes, and they have that real stretch wrap tape on them. It's like, they made robots just to like cut and remove the plastic, and the robots couldn't do it. They would get jammed up all the time. He tried to automate everything, and something as simple as taking off wrapping paper, they were unable to do. So like, I couldn't imagine the difficulty with what you're talking about. So but aside from saying like, hey, let's raise the minimum wage, like what would it look like, right? If you paid $100 an hour, I bet you could get people like, I'd show up like that sounds great. But like, like if we go from $20 an hour to say like $30 an hour, now $30 an hour with a 2,000 hour, annual pay, that's $60,000. That's not bad money at all, right? I mean, neither is $20 an hour, but at $30 an hour, like what would that do to the price of our average dairy products?
So yeah, I see where you're going with it. And the reality is, first and foremost, all agricultural commodities, we're price takers, not price makers. The price of what we're paid for our good, whether you're talking about milk or butter, grains, sugar beet, like those prices are set typically through the Chicago Mercantile Exchange is the underlying pricing mechanism, because that is the exchange where you see commodities traded. So that's where you have the public clearinghouse of price discovery is on the CME. And so we are very much exposed to the brutality of supply and demand economics. And so our dairy producers, they can't just say, okay, I've got to go increase wages to attract more workers, so I'm going to set my milk price higher, as I sell it to the processor. No, there's set formulas based on the price of cheese on the CME that determine what our dairymen are paid for their milk.
So you don't set your own price. You just have to accept what people are willing to pay for it. So if you jack up from $20 to $30 an hour, it may not even be a question of, hey, that's going to affect the price of your milk or your butter or your ice cream X amount. It's more of, we will not be able to turn a profit, and we will no longer be a viable business model.
Yeah. So then you have to go through the attrition of dairymen going out of business, production decreasing. Then you would see that increase in price to consumers, but it's a delayed response, and not a delay.
And it would ruin everyone. Like they would, how many farms and operations would be destroyed? Like that's not a viable option. It's like, well, just let the market do what the market does.
Because it's a delayed response, not by days or weeks, but by months and sometimes years. And so there's not that immediate like, oh, we really hurt the dairyman's bottom line, and that resulted in an increase in milk price or cheese price or ice cream price that we experienced a few weeks later. It's maybe 9 to 18 months later, you're going to see that impact in the grocery store to you, as we've put all sorts of dairy families out of business to get to that point to where you reduce supply enough that you would and so it's not a viable option. It's not a viable option. Yeah. It's messy and it's very draconian.
Gotcha. What has been, and I know Representative Hill last year brought an E-Verify bill, or wanted to bring an E-Verify bill, and he was likening it to, like his gardener or people that are here an authorized workforce that have to compete with, an unauthorized workforce, like, gardeners or landscapers are classic examples of this. And at the time, especially when he was talking about this, it's like, okay, well I guess that makes perfect sense. But in reality, what you're saying is like, no. There is no mechanism for us to resolve this problem under the current legislation. So have people come forward with carve-outs for like dairy. I don't know if there are other, year-round ag issues, but Like I have to assume cattle have the same issue, right? Like we're eating beef year round no matter what. But the bottom line is, are there other issues like, or excuse me, has anybody proposed legislation or brought something forward to say, hey, let's make a carve out for this industry specifically because it has industry specific issues?
Yeah, so that's the ongoing discussion we're having because we know that there are, whether it's Representative Hill or other legislators out there, Representative Redmond brought some bills forward last year related to E-Verify, and so we're having these ongoing conversations to try and put a trigger in the bill so that if you have access to a visa program, that E-Verify would apply to your economic sector. If you don't have access to a visa program, and this is our idea of getting at that issue, if you don't have access to a visa program, you're not subject to that provision of E-Verify until you do have access to a visa program. Once you have access to that visa program, then you would have to,
Sure.
abide by that provision. And so that's our way of trying to get at that issue where we don't damage Idaho's agricultural sectors, which we are the backbone of Idaho's economy, especially the rural parts of our state. If you damage agriculture in those parts of the state, you're going to have significant ripple effects through that entire economy in rural Idaho. And eventually it's going to come back to urban Idaho as well, just because of the amount of GDP that comes out of agriculture in the state.
Outside of the Idaho specific E-Verify, because I hear what you're saying, and that seems reasonable. It's like, hey, look, we would be in support of this, even though the E-Verify has its own problems. Like and again, for those not familiar, and you could speak on it better than I could, but E-Verify essentially said, hey, we are going to make the business owner essentially start verifying that their employment base is here in an authorized manner. Whereas it exists right now, it's like, listen, I can take papers from the people that work for me. I can't question them. I can't question their immigration status. I do not have access to like a federal database per se. Like I take their information, and if it looks legit, and I got to be careful saying if it doesn't look legit, because then I can get sued for discrimination. Yep. But I take this information and then I go ahead and operate. If they have, social security number, they have, this paper or whatever it might be. Again, I don't work in the sector, but if they have this stuff, I don't get to question it. I just move on. And what the E-Verify is saying is like, no. Now the burden is on the business owner, like the family farmer or whatever it might be, the family dairy. Now the burden is on the business owner to actually verify and remove people that they cannot conclusively verify are. So everybody becomes like a tiny ICE or tiny like immigration hub. Is that essentially accurate?
Yeah, no,
okay.
That's very accurate, and it's probably worth walking everybody through the hiring process in an agricultural operation or another operation. I think there's a lot of perception that employees are paid at cash under the table, and there's not your normal hiring process, and that's completely untrue. I don't know of a single dairy producer in this state or other states that do it that way. Our dairymen are filling out I-9 forms just like any other Idaho employer is filling out an I-9 form. They've taken all the documentation needed to satisfy that I-9. And you're right. The documentation that they are provided looks as real as yours or mine. And the employer is prohibited from trying to make a determination on if that document is bona fide or not. Because if they make that determination and they get it wrong, they are liable for hiring discrimination practices. And so they're in this no-win situation. So they take all the information needed to fill out the I-9 form. Taxes are withheld, both withholding and FICA taxes. And if that individual is here without status as an unauthorized individual, there's nobody going to collect against that Social Security in the future. There's nobody going to file a tax return to be able to get some of that money back when they file that tax return. That is money paid in that bolsters the tax rolls, bolsters our Social Security system, and keeps it afloat longer than it otherwise would be. And there's never a draw against that. And these individuals also don't have access to the same services if they need help as you or I would.
Like what do you mean?
So food stamps.
Okay.
So they fall on hard times, unemployment, food stamps, all of those, public services, they're ineligible. at a state level. There are certain federal services that have to be honored. So education of young individuals, so they can access public education. If they show up to a hospital with significant injuries, they have to be treated and stabilized.
Sure.
And so you have a few of those federal basic things that are covered, but outside of that, they don't have access to the benefits other Idaho taxpayers have access to for being a taxpayer.
Yeah. And obviously they can't legally participate in elections. They can't, right. So even if they have access to a school, they don't get to vote for school board members and things of that nature. And they pay into the tax system without getting any of the benefit of the tax system. Besides, obviously, like they benefit from defense just tangentially because they reside here. So, you know, the United States Army does defend the United States. Yeah. I had no idea that there was this big issue. I knew that there was a labor problem. I always thought it was just dependency. I didn't know that logistically there was this. I have to imagine that from a legal standpoint, this is an issue across the country though, right? Like, okay, so it's not that this is unique to Idaho. It's like if you got a dairy in Wisconsin, it's the same problem. Yeah,
across the country and across agriculture. So one of the more interesting stats that we like to share is Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, every year does an ag worker survey. And so they have a statistician from Department of Labor going out interviewing ag workers. One of the questions they ask is, are you authorized to be in country? Year in, year out, that number of individuals that answers that question that they are unauthorized hovers around 40%. So across all of agriculture, 40% of the workers are brave enough to tell a federal employee that they're not authorized to be in country. You know full and well that is an underreported stat.
I wouldn't be honest.
I wouldn't either. There's no way I'm telling a federal worker if I'm here without status that I'm here without status. So, you know, all reasonable estimates have about 50% of our on-farm agricultural workforce in this country is unauthorized. The underlying issue there is we can't feed ourselves as a country, let alone all the other countries in the world that we supply food to and help feed. We can't feed ourselves without this workforce. And we have to find a way to solve this issue at a federal level because the state doesn't have the ability to give us as a dairy industry a visa program. The state legislature, the governor, they don't have that authorization. The Constitution is very clear that that is reserved for the federal government. And so for nearly 20 years, we've been going back to DC and beating this drum of we have to figure out how to reform the visa program. You have to give industries like dairy, where we have a year-round workforce, access to a visa program so that we can find a pathway forward that doesn't put our economy or our food production at risk. Because if we can't feed ourselves as a country, that's not just an economic risk. That's a national security risk if you can't have the ability to be independent on your food production. And so as this situation escalates, we've been trying to make the point that this is bigger than just the economic argument. This is a national security argument if we are resorting to importing our food because we're not willing to reform our visa program to be able to produce it ourselves.
Well, the other thing is, it's like, look, people may not see a national security problem right now. And they're like, I hear what you're saying. And supply chain should be at the top of every single person's list of like things we need to fix, lest we experience what we experienced in recent years with supply chain disruptions. But people may not see the security or the food security and national security risk right now, but because of the political atmosphere and the movements towards securing our border, which is great, right? Like because of that, we're essentially manufacturing a crisis where it's on like the one hand, it's like, no, you almost exclusively, or not exclusive, excuse me, you have to rely to some degree on an unauthorized workforce. And on the other hand, we're saying, hey, let's get all the illegals out. It's like, okay, you realize you're just about to like kick yourself in the face, right? Because like, let's just acknowledge. Somebody was telling me about a Senate bill from Texas. Could you explain that to me?
Yeah. So you've got so it's Texas Senate Bill 4, which essentially in the state of Texas authorized the state to identify, detain, and deport individuals. It made being in Texas as an unauthorized individual a state crime. So then the state
So
could,
not a federal issue. It's like, no. It's a state. We're Texas Rangers are going to come get you.
yes,
Gotcha.
and so that at this point that law is being stayed as it works its way through the appeals process, and it's in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals right now. The last time not the Idaho, but the U.S. Supreme Court addressed this issue was in 2012 when Arizona passed a similar law. And at that point in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court made it clear that this was a federal issue and that the Constitution reserved the right of the federal government to address it, not the state government. And so they found Arizona's law unconstitutional.
Okay, if I may, real fast.
Yep.
And this push towards, because I remember big problems in Arizona back at that time.
Yep.
I have to imagine that this push towards putting this power in the hands of the state came from the state saying, hey, you're not securing the border. We have all of these negative fallouts from illegal immigration. ICE is not showing up, or the federal agencies involved with deportation and identification are not showing up and doing their job. We are going to take this into our hands. Yeah. And that led Arizona, I guess, in 2012 to that, which I didn't know, but it makes perfect sense. And then following Texas, like Texas has been tip of the spear for this as well. And they're like, like everybody, I remember Representative Hill went down to like Eagle Pass and was like observing, like tens of thousands of people coming across this river, and a horrible humanitarian crisis it was like, look, you'd see a giant boat with people in it that you knew were like cartel and human trafficking people coming across the river. And, the U.S. patrols would go out to get them. And some cartel agent would grab a kid, hold it up, and just throw it into the river, right? So this poor kid starts drowning. And of course, the boat peels out to go save the kid. And the boat with the rest of the people and the drugs and whatever else just continue on. And he's watching this happen in real time. He's like, how is this possible? They're like, this is our problem. This is what we're dealing with. So it makes sense then that Texas steps up and says, hey, I'm not about this life. Like, I'm not going to keep asking you to do something you should inherently be doing. I'm going to take it into my hands. So that's essentially what's also happening to some degree in Idaho, correct?
Yeah. So we have very, very similar legislation that's being proposed in Idaho right now. House Bill 11 in its current form is very similar to that Texas bill.
Who's running House Bill 11? Do you know?
Representative Jerem Crane is a sponsor of House Bill 11.
Fantastic. Okay, great.
So he's and let's make one thing clear.
I got to get a hold of this guy.
Yeah,
holler at me, Representative Crane.
Yeah, you should have a conversation with Representative Crane. And to give Representative Crane credit, he has been very open to sitting down with us and listening to our perspective and considering amendments to that bill. So I have to give the representative credit. He's been incredibly accommodating to sit down and listen with us and to have an open door. So we appreciate that, because that's really all we can ask of legislators is sit down, listen to our perspective, and understand how this might impact us and our dairy producers. But we need to make one thing clear. Agriculture supports a secure border. We don't think what we've seen the last few years at our southern border is appropriate or good for the country. And so we wholeheartedly agree. We have to address what's been going on at the southern border. And we have to not have such a porous border where we don't know who or what are coming and going across that border. So just want to make that abundantly clear that we don't ever advocate for an unsecure border. In that same conversation, though, we need to realistically provide legal pathways. We have to secure the border and then provide legal doorways for people to come through to fill the jobs that we have available in our economy to fill, that we can't find domestic workers willing to fill them. And that has to be a two-part conversation, because if you only work on the enforcement piece of it, then we end up with a bottleneck on the employment aspect in the near future. And so we need both things to happen. And the optimist in me looks at, okay, the Trump administration absolutely is starting on day one addressing the border. does that create enough space to have Congress to get back to having a serious conversation around, immigration reforms? Because everything we've heard the last few years going back to DC advocating on this issue is, hey, the border is sucking all the oxygen out of the room, and there's no place for a conversation on reforms until we address the border. We're going to get that border addressed, sooner rather than later with all the steps that are being taken today. And we're hopeful that that is going to create the space where we can get back to negotiating at the table and trying to find some sort of visa program for dairy and other year-round agricultural sectors and other sectors of the economy, like home building, where you don't have a visa program for those businesses to procure workers for.
Can I ask you something? Okay. And you obviously have had these conversations over and over and over. So I apologize, again, like I'm 5. This seems so clear. Like, if I'm somebody who doesn't like this idea and you sit down and you're like, hey, I have a demand for year-round 365 workforce and I'm not able to fulfill it domestically, we know that. I can't run an operation for any duration, for any significant duration of time at a loss, right? And if we, blah, 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 all the things we've talked about. That's why, can you just please make like an H2 milk visa, where it's like, you got milk, you want milk, we're going to get you milk, but you got to like just make this thing and that's it. What is the problem with doing that? Where it's like, what are we negotiating? Like, what are the drawbacks? Because if you're negotiating, it's like, hey, look, I have this problem, but I have this benefit. And you're like, well, I got this problem, I got this benefit. And you negotiate, right? But like, what's the negotiation? It's like, are you against categorically people coming from out of country to in an authorized workforce? No, you're not. Okay, great. Because like we have it. We have H2, whatever, A visas. What is the problem then? What do the detractors say? They're like, this will cause a problem for us if we make an H2 milk visa because what is it?
Yeah. So the politics around this become extraordinarily complex.
God bless it. I can't wait.
Yeah. God
okay,
bless it.
Here we go.
So let's take a step back. I believe it was 2013, 2014. And we had a comprehensive immigration bill that passed the U.S. Senate. And it was on its way, and there were enough votes to pass it in the House. Before they voted on that bill, they went home for midterm elections, midterm primary elections. Eric Cantor was in House leadership at the time, and he had a contested primary, and he was a proponent of this bill to reform comprehensive across all economic sectors for immigration reform. He was a proponent of it. He got beat in that primary that year. And so Republicans at that point got scared to take this issue up and pass it. And so that bill withered on the vine in the House. From that point, everybody looked at it and said, okay, comprehensive is, it's too heavy. There's too many complexities to it. Let's break it up by economic sectors and let's do it piecemeal. And agriculture, we've been one of the loudest voices. So, Farm Workforce Modernization Act is the bill that passed the House, not this last Congress, but each of the previous 2 Congresses. Because ag's been so vocal, we ended up being, one of the first ones out the gate to try and, move some sort of reform forward. You have all the other economic sectors looking at, okay, that bill that passes first is the template we have to live with in our economic sector. And that's the starting point of how they're going to approach a visa program for our economic sector.
So people outside of the ag or dairy industry are looking at revisions that you're trying to make or separate bills you're trying to make and comparing them to their own industry because it will essentially become a template or a boilerplate agreement that then gets applied to construction or something else. And so they have problems with your bills or things that you try to pass, even though the revisions or problems are irrelevant to your industry and they're only relevant to their industry. So everybody doesn't want to be second. And if they are going to be second, the initial bill better reflect their wants and needs.
Yes.
That sounds terrible. Oh my God. That's horrific.
So that's really been the political environment that we've been operating within to try and find a pathway forward. And today it's a mixed bag on opinions on if we should still try and go forward and do this sector by sector, or if we should go back to the comprehensive discussion. No clear indication which way this goes as we proceed forward, but that gives you a flavor for how this issue ends up being so contentious and so difficult, and why you have politicians, and both parties are guilty. It's not like one party or the other is the savior or
Right.
the innocent one. Both parties have had opportunities where they've controlled the presidency and both chambers of Congress and haven't addressed the issue. Republicans are up to bat right now. They've got the presidency, they've got the Senate, they've got the House. So we're going to work like hell to try and find a way forward the next couple of years here while we have this equation to try and get something passed that gives us a visa program.
God, man, that's what a mountain to climb. That's a lot. Are you familiar? I think it's like Reed Creamery in, are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Alan Reed and his family, Reed's Dairy.
Okay.
Some of the best ice cream you'll ever have.
That's what I was going to say. So my wife plays on a water polo team, like an adult water polo team. And they had a water polo tournament in Rigby this last summer, floating cage. So it was like in the middle of this lake. They had to swim out to it, which it was really cool. And like my boys and I were sitting on paddle boards and stuff watching this. My wife's out there like lighting it up. It's awesome. And we kept hitting the Reed ice cream, the Reed Dairy. And it was like, this is the best ice cream I have ever had, like in my life. And it was great. And it was like this iconic spot. And, like we're going there, we're like, wow, this is really interesting. Because again, as somebody who grew up in a very urbanized area, I was very removed from any kind of like family run dairy, or like, I just didn't have the opportunity for it. But going and having that, I was like, this is fantastic. And what a crying shame that it's like they have to deal with all of this turmoil. And it's like they're delivering this fantastic product. I'd love to talk to them, by the way. If you could connect me with them, like I'd love to have them on, because their ice cream is just, oh my gosh, it's the best. I love that you said ice cream too. Like you instantly knew. It's like, it's so good.
No, and the Reed family themselves are just wonderful people. So we'll definitely get you connected.
Yeah, get me connected with them.
We'll get you connected to Alan.
But it's those types of things where I think people can be very removed from industries that they rely on, but they don't. They're like, people figure it out. Like, I don't care. Secure the border, like get rid of the illegals, like all of these things. But when you touch somebody, or touch an industry or a family, and you're like, oh, wait, these are those people. Like I had that ice cream. They're going to get hammered by this. It's like, oh no, that's really bad. And I think that's one of the things about Idaho that I'm so taken by. Like you can get connected with people that are actually affected by politics in a meaningful way. And it changes my view of those people. It changes my view of the issue. Like I don't want something bad to befall that family who's obviously made this iconic spot, this iconic product. It's like the Reed ice cream. It's like, this is really, really good. So I hope you guys can figure it out. I hope you get some movement in the next 4 years.
I hope so. And I would take that connection one step further. Go back to Trump's first presidency, and our oldest daughter, she had graduated high school shortly before, and she was home for a visit and was over at some of her friends' house while she was home for the visit. And two of her friends that she had known her entire childhood were having a debate. They both were unauthorized, which our daughter had no idea. She had gone through middle school, high school with these individuals, done sleepovers, like had no idea. They're middle-class families in Twin Falls, Idaho. And they're having this debate. One had applied for DACA and one had not, and trying to determine who had made the better decision. Because the one friend that applied for DACA possibly put themselves on a list, and the one that didn't have DACA status, but also wasn't potentially on a list. And that is the situation in so many of our communities where you have unauthorized individuals that you are friends with or your children are friends with, and you have no idea because they have kept that secret and they don't want anybody to know because of the risks surrounding that issue. But they are just trying to make it in our communities and fill jobs and build businesses, buy homes. They're just pursuing the American dream in more situations than not. And we're better off as a country if we can find ways to make that process work for everybody, to where they can pursue that American dream in a legal fashion, in a way that is realistic, that doesn't take them 20 years to get in country or cost enormous amounts of money to be able to procure that visa. We're better off as a country if we can find better solutions than what we've had for the last 40 years.
Rick, my guy, I really appreciate you coming out. Thanks for what you're doing for the industry. I really hope we can find a solution for this. It's man, it's a train wreck, and I did not know that we had these fundamental industries that are in these binds, and that just does not seem right. Hook me up with the Reed ice cream people.
Hey, we'll get you hooked up.
All right, thanks, Rick.
Hey, thank you.